Hi, my name is Hyeonsu Kang, and today I'll be presenting ComLittee Literature Discovery with Personal Elected Author Committees. This was a collaboration project with Nouran, Soliman, Matt Latzke, Chang, and Jonathan Bragg. The key motivation behind this work came from our previous work at Kai 22. In that study, we saw how scholars frequently draw upon their understanding of others to reason about the problem settings of their new papers, what kinds of methods and epistemological approaches might have been used, etc. Observations like this provided a window into how there's this valuable reserve of social knowledge of other authors. And at the high level, a long line of related research also supports this value, especially in sociology, which explore the value of building mental models of other scholars and argued that as scholars develop their specialization, it's easy to miss connections to insightful other domains, where identifying such useful bridging authors can be particularly impactful for innovative thinking. In terms of the practice of literature discovery, relevant prior studies include Sandstorm's and also Peter Crowley's studies. Specifically in Sandstorm's work, it was found that when scholars looked for references by themselves, they tended to be locating more of peripheral literature as opposed to things that are more core to the domain. More recently, there's an emerging paradigm of literature discovery systems that focuses on author entities as part of the context for paper recommendations. The first one here supplements the paper recommendation with user-author relations message. And the second, author names are directly augmented with .uis, which displays relevance information on user interactions such as mouse over. This kind of author-centric orientation has shown to improve engagement and subsequent discovery experience, which we term author-augmented literature discovery. But an important limitation here was the lack of support for user interaction and control over development sources. Users couldn't curate exactly which authors may be interesting or relevant, nor which of their papers were relevant. This could be problematic because authors often have multiple threads of research where some of their papers may be personally interesting or relevant to the user, others not so much. So we reflected on the design space for author-augmented literature discovery using prior work and identify 7 dimensions along which existing work bisects that space. For the location of author recommendations, for instance, systems like Bridger fall into the category of directly pushing author recommendations, whereas prior work such as feedlands or augmentative author messages fall in the highlighting category. Our goal with ComLittee was to support more active curation and user interaction with other entities for which we felt pushing author recommendations was important. Similarly, to go beyond the limitations of the author messages in which relevant authors were automatically inferred in the system using the user feedback on papers and interaction logs. In ComLittee, users could directly save on author or curate their papers, and also from a group of multiple related authors, or a group of multiple related authors, which we call elected author committee. A quote from last year's Kai paper, where users could identify different threads of papers for individual authors. And so we really look to design for users' ability to curate which authors and what papers of theirs were interesting and relevant in the discovery process. The curated committee of authors could also be used to expand the sources of subsequent author recommendations. For example, without author-level curation, the system may only rely on the papers that the user has saved in their library to infer authors of other relevant papers. More actively forming a community of curated authors can act as a proxy for recommendation, for example, by using their co-author relations or by approximating their paper reading history from their citations to further recommend scholars and papers that might be relevant and interesting to the user. Finally, in addition to recommending new authors, the curated authors may also augment explanations relevance for both paper and author recommendation types, and we refer interested readers to the paper for the full descriptions of the dimensions of the design space. Based on this reflection, we proposed ComLittee, a novel system that supports rich author-centered interaction. ComLittee interaction is in 3 main stages. First, users curate a set of seed papers they're interested in to initiate recommendations from the system. Second, in the course of receiving and reviewing the author recommendations, they can save relevant authors while also providing feedback on their papers. And finally, the curated authors can then be used to enrich relevance explanations. Here's a walkthrough of this system. As the user uses scenario, imagine a research scientist interested in learning more about a new research area that she recently started investigating. She imports the relevant papers she discovered using online paper recommendation services in her library folder to the system. Now, ComLittee uses these seed papers to generate initial author recommendations relevant to topics and whom were familiar to her from her recent reading. Recognizing these authors, she clicks on the bookmark buttons next to their names to save them to her committee for the topic. Using the feedback buttons next to each paper, she could save additional relevant papers to her folder or download whenever she sees a relevant paper to help ComLittee better understand her interests. After saving a few authors and papers, she clicks on the load new button to get a new batch of recommendations. Now she sees or notices ComLittee starting to recommend additional authors that she does not recognize in their author cards. She can see their connections to authors that share reading news. For example, one unfamiliar author was frequently cited by several familiar authors in her community, and in their paper list, she could see multiple interesting and relevant papers ranked at the top. Feeling confident, she saves this new author to the folder, and exploration goes on as recommendations and relevance explanations improve over time. How are ComLittee's author recommendation algorithms implemented? ComLittee uses three main triadic closure-based mechanisms for sourcing author recommendations. The 3 points in the triangle are the users and their feedback on papers, the entity on the left that mediates the relevance relation between the user and the new entity to be recommended at the top. The goal of the system is to find useful entities at the top for recommendation, useful entities in the middle for recommendations at the top that complete the triangle with a strong relevance relations in that dashed arrows. The first kind of mechanism searches for authors who wrote most relevant new papers based on the user feedback on the papers thus far. The second kind searches for most frequent co-authors of the user's data committee of authors while constraining for topic and similarity in the process by using the SPM ranker's estimated relevance scores, limiting only to those that score higher than 0, which indicates relevance. And the last mechanism uses cited by edges instead of co-authorship edges, so it searches for authors most frequently cited by the committee authors. And we had for the real-time interaction, we scoped their search mechanisms to be amenable to support interaction, which meant introducing a number of hyperparameters and approximations, such as sampling a limited number of candidates that are scoring at the top. How did ComLittee and author-centric interaction more broadly benefit discovery? So for evaluation, we were interested in two main constructs related to discovery, which were efficiency and quality of the discovery. So to evaluate them, we designed a controlled experiment, a within subjects design, and we operationalize the constructs by measuring how many papers they've saved or downloaded during the experiment, how many authors they've saved, and their post-experiment ratings of interestingness, relevance, and a priori familiarity. And we compared ComLittee to a complete baseline system. Here are some more details about the baseline system, which can be found in the paper. The TLDR. First, we found that user efficiency was much higher in ComLittee than in the baseline system. We looked at the trajectory of discovery and found that ComLittee helped users find novel authors in the second half of the experiment using the familiar authors they query in the first. They could shortcut better to more relevant patches of papers. And finally, this seemed to be due to better alignment between the relevance model using author-centric approach.